Well, along the same line, what I was curious about was the lack of the sufficient countermeasures undertaken by the government, rather than the newspaper editorials and this outside the media, independent opinion leaders. I thought that there's lack of ability on the part of the political leaders in Korea who can come out and articulate what are the issues at hand and how they see it and how they can be dealt with. And I always feel that it has something to do with the way we are raised, and especially because the political leaders, even today, tend to be the older generation. And they always, when they were raised, keeping quiet is more of a virtue than speaking up. And they are not trained properly to really, present their thoughts and their arguments in a very rational, logical, convincing manner. And I thought that the president ought to be able to come out and explain to the people, and there was just total lack of it. And the second part that I was wondering about is that South Korea government has taken a very active role in the development of and widespread of the internet. And the culture, the internet culture, they came with it subsequently, whether they intended it or not. I don't think there was that part. But why is it that the government seemed to be paralyzed? And instead of utilizing the experience and the capacity that they must have gained through the early days of distributing or encouraging, promoting, and the widespread of the internet, they just seem to be totally incapable of utilizing the internet for their benefit to articulate and take the countermeasure. And this, I think, goes back to my first point. And again, these political leaders, the older generation, higher level bureaucrats, they all have still the difficulty in articulating their points in a very open and logical and convincing way. And I wonder whether you have thought about that, whether you have any comments about it.
Culturally, South Korea, the Korean politicians suffer lack of mechanism of negotiation and compromise. And also, majority of people were grown up listening to this Confucius belief, like four virtuous men, which represents bamboo, which is not flexible, does not break at all, and chrysanthemum, and there are two others, orchid, and they all focus on the people who stick to the principle, who do not move for the instant interest. So people believe to stick with the principle. When President Roh Moo-hyun was impeached, I was wondering, I was in Korea and I asked my colleagues, why can't he just apologize and avoid the impeachment? Because what the opposition politicians wanted was just single word, I'm sorry. But he couldn't. And then I was also wondering, all the people were admiring former President Roh Moo-hyun because he stick to the principle. Even Park Geun-hye recently has this nice comment on her because she sticks to the principle. So I think this is a culture. They feel shame changing their thoughts and jump into compromise and negotiation.
Sorry, is it possible that they stick to the principle only because they just can't figure out how better to explain?
That's why their behavior is going extreme. They can't compromise within the party, so they betray completely. They leave the party, they move on. Within the party politics, they there's a very strong top-down hierarchy. Once they are outside of the mainstream, once once they are outside of the leader's eyes, they are out, they are dead. So they have to move for another party.
Do you also see that there is a quantifiable demographic shift or difference in age between those that could not, if they try to mobilize some of the new digital realm and those that use it effectively?
Yeah, I see. Even electoral votes and candlelight visuals, they are mostly done by the young generation. It goes even to junior high school students, teenagers. So there's a strong age gap, generational gap. But then again, when I see this young generation, they're still the same because they grew up in a very Asian family, believe in top-down hierarchy, and being within the collective society is very important for them. They need to stay within the society. So in that kind of society, it is very easy to marginalize or exclude those people who do not belong to the majority, like transgender, gay, foreigners. Females. Yeah.
I want to just follow up on what Robert mentioned, which is it's related to the question that I was asking, which is, would the system itself find a way to kind of contain this type of mass modern behavior that occurred in Korea? And one of the key factors in the United States is, like you said, opinion leaders, editorials, and people who actually spoke out and trying to tell what is true and what is not true, and what is rumor and what's not rumor. And that kind of behavior or that kind of action in Korea was very much lacking, including the government. So, but secondly, I think Koreans are very emotional, and so when they get latched onto an issue, it becomes a national phenomenon for a very short period of time, and it disappears, typically. In this incident, it didn't. And I think this time it didn't disappear so quickly is because people kind of knew that, hey, beef is not the main issue, but every group had self-interest in promoting this kind of protest because it was against the government. There's some anti-Americanism, maybe very little. I don't think there's a lot of that. There's inability of the government to deal with this kind of issues. There's, like you mentioned, these kinds of failures in the government early on and how to appoint officials and things like that. And I think everyone kind of used the situation to their advantage. And so you had formed a very loose coalition in which if you take them individually, they would not really have done it. But they're using everyone else to kind of promote this. And so the question that I want to go back to is that if we don't want to regulate free flow of information, like the way Chinese have done, or some other regions have tried to do this, then we have to figure out a mechanism in which you could mitigate these types of situations, try to prevent this type of situation. And that is to have a strong, independent voice that people would trust, so that when you have one flow of information, it could always be checked against some independent source of information. And I don't know whether that kind of phenomenon is happening, whether, now that this crisis is over, no one really cares about this and not really worried about it. I don't know what you're...
There are very strong voices on the extreme right in Korea, but by the national security law, South Korea cannot have strong leftist view in public. So in a way, ideology is very focused, centered in the right or center-right. And I know a lot of politicians and media accuse people, especially with the progressive parties, or 전교조, that's National Education Union, leftist, socialist, and in the previous seminar they said they are communist. I don't think they are communist, but they are rather nationalists, having different views on unification and having different views on foreign policies. So in that